The scorching Arizona sun had finally set, leaving behind a peaceful summer evening in the outskirts of Phoenix. It was around 9:30 p.m. when Sergeant James Miller pulled his well-maintained Harley-Davidson into the dimly lit Parker's gas station, the only stop for miles on the lonely stretch of highway. At 35 years old, Miller didn't look like your typical soldier. Standing at 5'10" with a lean build, he could easily blend into any crowd. His short brown hair was neatly trimmed, and the only visible signs of his military service were the dog tags tucked beneath his plain black t-shirt and the disciplined way he carried himself. After 3 tough deployments with the Army Rangers, he had learned to stay alert even in the most ordinary situations. The gas station was quiet, with only a few flickering fluorescent lights illuminating the concrete pad beneath the metal awning. The small convenience store attached to it cast a warm glow through its windows, where a young woman in her early 20s stood behind the counter, looking bored as she scrolled through her phone. Miller had been riding for the past 4 hours, making his way back from visiting his sister in California. The long ride had left him tired but satisfied. There was something peaceful about cruising down the open road on his bike, feeling the wind against his face and leaving his combat memories behind. As he dismounted his motorcycle, Miller's trained eyes automatically scanned his surroundings, an instinct that had saved his life more than once overseas. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a rusty pickup truck parked near the store entrance. The air smelled of gasoline and desert dust, and crickets chirped in the darkness beyond the station's lights. Walking to the store entrance, Miller noticed the name tag on the young attendant's uniform read Sarah. She gave him a polite nod as he entered, and he grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. His throat was dry from the long ride, and he knew he needed to stay hydrated in the Arizona heat, even at night. "Evening, ma'am," he said quietly, placing the water and a $20 bill on the counter. "Could I get 40 on pump 3, please?" Sarah smiled, appreciating his politeness. "Sure thing, sir. Would you like your receipt?" Before Miller could answer, the distant rumble of multiple motorcycles broke the evening silence. The sound grew louder, echoing off the metal awning as several bikes approached the station. Miller's military instincts kicked in, and he felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the same feeling he used to get on patrol when something wasn't quite right. Through the store's windows, he watched as 5 motorcycles roared into the station. Unlike his well-kept Harley, these bikes were loud and aggressive, modified for maximum noise. The riders matched their machines. Rough-looking men wearing leather vests covered in patches that Miller recognized as belonging to a local troublemaking motorcycle club. Sarah's smile faded as she watched the bikers pull up. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed Miller his change, and he noticed her glancing nervously at the emergency button under the counter. "Everything okay?" Miller asked quietly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Those guys?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "They'd caused trouble here before. Last month, they roughed up one of our regular customers and stole a bunch of stuff. My manager installed new security cameras after that, but they still come around sometimes." Miller nodded, taking in the information while maintaining his relaxed posture. He'd been in enough situations to know that showing fear or tension would only make things worse. As he walked toward the door to fuel his bike, he heard the bikers' loud laughter and the sound of heavy boots on concrete. The night air had grown cooler, but the atmosphere at Parker's gas station had become charged with tension. Miller took his time walking to his motorcycle, carefully observing the 5 men as they dismounted their bikes. They were all large guys, ranging from their late 20s to early 40s, with various tattoos visible on their arms and necks. The largest one, sporting a thick beard and a bandana, was already staring at Miller with obvious hostility. As Miller began fueling his motorcycle, he kept his movements casual and unhurried. 15 years of military service had taught him that the next few minutes could either pass uneventfully or explode into chaos. Either way, Sergeant James Miller would be ready. The 5 bikers spread out across the gas station, their heavy boots scraping against the concrete as they moved. The leader, who the others called Beast, was a hulking figure standing well over 6 feet tall. His massive arms were covered in faded tattoos, and a long scar ran down the left side of his face, twisting his permanent scowl into something even more menacing. As Miller continued fueling his bike, he watched through the store windows as 2 of the bikers entered the convenience store. Sarah's face went pale as the bell above the door chimed. The remaining 3 bikers positioned themselves strategically around the property. one by the ice machine, another near the air pump, and Beast himself standing near the store entrance, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking signs clearly posted. Inside the store, the two bikers began their harassment. The taller one, wearing a leather vest with Viper stitched on the back, started knocking items off the shelves while his partner, a stocky man with a shaved head, leaned against the counter, getting uncomfortably close to Sarah. "Hey there, pretty lady," the stocky biker said loud enough for his voice to carry outside. "Remember us? We sure remember you." His words dripped with intimidation, and Sarah took a step back, bumping into the cigarette display behind her. Miller finished fueling his motorcycle, his movements deliberately slow and controlled. He replaced the gas cap and noted the positions of all 5 bikers. His military training had taught him to always have an exit strategy, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the young attendant alone with these men. Through the windows, Miller could see Viper now throwing bags of chips on the floor, creating a mess while laughing. The stocky biker had moved behind the counter, forcing Sarah to press herself against the wall. Tears were forming in her eyes, but she was trying to maintain her composure. Outside, Beast flicked his cigarette onto the ground and crushed it under his boot. He noticed Miller watching the scene and took a threatening step forward. "Got a problem, boy?" he growled, his voice rough from years of smoking. Miller turned to face him calmly. "No problem here," he replied evenly, his voice carrying no trace of fear or aggression. "Just getting some gas." The biker by the ice machine snickered and cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing in the night air. The one near the air pump pulled out a length of chain from his bike, letting it dangle menacingly from his fist. Inside the store, the situation was escalating. The stocky biker had grabbed Sarah's arm, causing her to cry out in pain. "Open the register," he demanded, while Viper continued destroying the store displays. Miller's combat-trained mind rapidly assessed the situation. 5 opponents, 2 inside, 3 outside. The 2 by the store entrance were the immediate threats. The one with the chain was trying to circle behind him, a classic flanking maneuver that Miller had seen countless times in combat. "Last chance to mind your own business and ride away," Beast warned, taking another step closer to Miller. The biker's breath reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, and Miller could see brass knuckles glinting on his right hand. Sarah's frightened voice carried through the store's open door. "Please, just leave me alone. Take the money and go." Miller knew he had seconds to make a decision. His military training screamed at him to create distance, to find cover, to call for backup. But his conscience wouldn't let him abandon Sarah to these thugs. He'd seen too many innocent people hurt during his deployments when good men chose to walk away. "Actually," Miller said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that made Beast pause momentarily, "I do have a problem with how you're treating that young lady." The tension in the air became electric. Beast's face contorted with rage at Miller's defiance. The chain-wielding biker moved closer, metal links jingling ominously in the night air. Inside the store, Sarah's eyes widened as she watched the confrontation unfolding through the windows. Miller stood his ground, his posture relaxed but ready. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught him that the calm before the storm was often the most crucial moment. As Beast's muscles tensed for action, Miller knew that the relative peace of this Arizona night was about to be shattered. The next few seconds would prove exactly why these bikers had chosen the wrong soldier to intimidate. Beast threw the first punch, his brass knuckles whistling through the air where Miller's head had been a split second before. Miller's combat reflexes took over as he smoothly stepped inside Beast's reach, using the bigger man's momentum against him. With practiced precision, Miller delivered a sharp elbow strike to Beast's ribs, followed by a quick knee to his thigh. The biker with the chain swung his weapon in a wide arc, but Miller had already anticipated the attack. He grabbed Beast's leather vest and used him as a shield, causing the chain to wrap around their leader's arm instead. Beast howled in pain and rage as the metal links bit into his flesh. Inside the store, Sarah took advantage of the distraction to break free from the stocky biker's grip. She ducked under his arm and ran toward the back room, her trembling fingers already dialing 911 on her cell phone. Viper saw her escape and moved to pursue her, but the sound of breaking bones outside drew his attention back to the parking lot. The third outside biker, who had been positioning himself by the ice machine, rushed Miller from behind. Without even looking, Miller sensed the attack coming. He dropped and rolled, causing his attacker to crash into Beast instead. Both men tumbled to the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses. Miller's movements were efficient and precise, each action serving a purpose. He wasn't fighting to show off or to hurt. He was fighting to control the situation and minimize damage. His Rangers training had taught him that the best fights were the ones that ended quickly. The chain-wielding biker, now frustrated that his weapon had been rendered useless, charged forward with a roar. Miller sidestepped the rush and used the man's own momentum to send him face-first into the gas pump. The impact wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, but it was sufficient to take him out of the fight. Inside the store, the two remaining bikers had finally realized their companions were in trouble. They rushed toward the door, but Miller had already positioned himself to control this choke point. As they burst outside, he met them with calculated force. The stocky biker reached for something in his back pocket. Miller wasn't going to wait to find out what it was. He struck with military precision, targeting pressure points and weak spots that would incapacitate without causing permanent damage. The stocky biker dropped to his knees, gasping for air after a perfectly placed strike to his solar plexus. Viper proved to be the smartest of the group. Seeing 4 of his companions taken down in less than a minute, he raised his hands and backed away. "Hey man, we're done here," he said, his voice shaking. "We didn't know you were. We didn't mean." Miller kept his guard up, his breathing controlled and steady. Years of combat experience had taught him that surrender could be a trick. But he could read the genuine fear in Viper's eyes. This fight was indeed over. Beast was struggling to get up, his face red with a mixture of pain, anger, and embarrassment. Who the hell are you?" he managed to growl through clenched teeth. Miller heard sirens in the distance. Sarah had successfully called the police. He maintained his defensive stance as he spoke, his voice calm and professional. "Just a soldier who doesn't like bullies," he replied simply. The gas station's security cameras had captured the entire incident. They showed how Miller had never thrown the first punch, how each of his moves had been defensive, and how he had used only the force necessary to stop the attack. When the police arrived minutes later, the footage would make it clear who the aggressors were. As red and blue lights began to flash in the distance, Miller looked around at the aftermath. 5 tough bikers, who had probably never lost a fight in their lives, had been systematically dismantled by one soldier in less than 2 minutes. None of them were seriously injured, just bruised bodies and egos. Sarah watched from the store window, her phone still in her hand, amazed at how quickly the situation had changed. The man who had appeared so quiet and polite just minutes ago had moved with the skill and precision of a highly trained warrior. The night air was still warm, but a different kind of tension now filled it. The kind that comes when bullies suddenly realize they've made a terrible mistake in choosing their target. As police cars pulled into the gas station, Miller knew this would be a long night of questions and statements. But he didn't regret his decision to stay and help. It was what any soldier worth their salt would have done. 3 police cars pulled into Parker's gas station, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Officer David Chen was the first to step out, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon as he surveyed the scene. What he saw surprised him. 5 large bikers, all subdued, with only one man standing calmly in the middle of them. "Evening, officers," Miller said, keeping his hands visible. The young lady inside already called this in. She's safe, and there's security footage of everything that happened. Officer Chen motioned for his partners to secure the bikers while he approached Miller. "Sir, I'm going to need you to explain exactly what happened here." His voice was professional, but carried an undertone of curiosity about how one man had managed to handle 5 notorious troublemakers. Inside the store, Sarah was already rewinding the security footage for another officer. Her hands had stopped shaking, and she spoke with growing confidence as she described the events. "He saved my life," she said, pointing to Miller through the window. "Those men have been harassing our store for months, but nobody ever stood up to them before." Outside, Beast was being handcuffed while still cursing under his breath. The officer securing him found the brass knuckles that had fallen during the fight, an illegal weapon that would add to their charges. The chain-wielding biker was sitting on the curb, holding an ice pack to his face where he had hit the gas pump. Miller explained the situation with military precision, his account matching perfectly with both Sarah's statement and the security footage. "I wasn't looking for trouble," he said, "but I couldn't leave that young woman in danger." Officer Chen nodded as he took notes. He had dealt with the biker gang before and knew their reputation for violence. What impressed him most was how Miller had managed to subdue them without causing serious injury to anyone. "You military?" Chen asked, noting Miller's disciplined demeanor and efficient handling of the situation. "Yes, sir. Army Rangers, 3 tours." Chen's respect visibly increased. His own brother had served with the Rangers, and he knew the level of training they received. "That explains a lot," he said, closing his notebook. "We've been trying to build a case against these guys for months. Tonight might finally give us what we need." Sarah emerged from the store, having finished giving her statement. She walked directly to Miller, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." The gas station's owner, Mr. Parker, arrived on the scene, having been called by the police. He was a short, balding man in his 60s who had owned the station for over 30 years. After watching the security footage, he turned to Miller with a look of deep appreciation. "Son, I've been dealing with these thugs threatening my business and employees for too long," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did tonight? Well, you're welcome here anytime. Your money's no good at this station anymore." More police vehicles arrived, including a crime scene unit to process evidence and document the scene. The bikers were loaded into separate patrol cars, their tough guy images shattered by one soldier who had refused to look the other way. Detective Lisa Martinez, who had been tracking the gang's activities, arrived to interview Miller personally. She was particularly interested in his technique for subduing the attackers without causing serious harm. "Most people would have just started swinging," she noted, "but you controlled the situation perfectly. The security footage shows clear self-defense, and a restraint in using force will make this an airtight case." As the night wore on, the gas station gradually returned to normal. The knocked-over merchandise was restored to its shelves, and the few spots of blood were cleaned up. Miller's motorcycle still stood where he had parked it, patiently waiting while its owner helped bring some justice to this small corner of Arizona. The local police had what they needed to finally crack down on the gang that had been terrorizing local businesses. Sarah had her confidence back, knowing she had been right to stand up to them by calling the police. And somewhere in holding cells across town, 5 bikers were learning a hard lesson about judging people by their appearance. As the last police car pulled away, Miller knew his quiet night had turned into something much more significant. But as a soldier, he understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but right here at home, standing up for what's right. The following morning, the local news crews descended on Parker's gas station. The story of a lone soldier taking down 5 notorious bikers had spread quickly through the small Arizona community. Mr. Parker's security footage had already made its way to the police department, and snippets of it were now being shown on every local channel's morning news. Miller, however, was nowhere to be found. After giving his final statement to Detective Martinez the night before, he had quietly mounted his Harley and continued his journey home, declining all requests for interviews. He didn't consider himself a hero. In his mind, he had simply done what any decent person should have done. Back at the station, Sarah arrived for her morning shift to find a crowd of reporters waiting. Camera crews set up their equipment while journalists practiced their opening lines. The gas station, usually quiet at this hour, was buzzing with activity. "Sarah, can you tell us about the soldier who saved you?" asked a reporter, shoving a microphone in her face as she tried to make her way to the store entrance. Mr. Parker appeared from inside, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by protective authority. "All right, that's enough," he announced, stepping between Sarah and the reporters. "This is still a business, and my employees need space to work. Any questions can be directed to the police department's press office." Inside the store, Sarah found a stack of newspapers on the counter. The local paper's headline read, "Military Hero Teaches Gang a Lesson in Respect." The security camera photos showed Miller's efficient takedown of the bikers, though his face was thankfully blurred to protect his privacy. Meanwhile, at the county jail, Beast and his gang were facing a judge for their bail hearing. The evidence against them was overwhelming: security footage, multiple witnesses, illegal weapons, and a history of similar incidents in the area. The judge, a veteran herself, showed little sympathy for their claims of being the victims. "Your Honor," Beast's lawyer argued, My clients were simply stopping for gas when they were attacked by this supposed soldier. Detective Martinez stepped forward, holding up a tablet showing the security footage. The evidence clearly shows your clients were the aggressors, Your Honor. The defendant with the brass knuckles threw the first punch, and Mr. Miller acted entirely in self-defense. The judge peered over her glasses at the footage, then at the 5 bikers. Bail is set at $50,000 each, she declared. And I'm issuing a restraining order preventing any of you from coming within 500 feet of Parker's gas station or its employees. Back at the station, the morning rush brought in curious locals who had seen the news. They'd all wanted to hear Sarah's first-hand account of what happened. She told the story again and again, each time feeling stronger about her decision to stand up to the gang by calling the police. Mr. Parker had already ordered new security equipment, determined to make his station an even safer place for his employees and customers. As he installed additional cameras, he couldn't help but smile at how one man's courage had changed everything. By afternoon, the story had reached the local military community. Veterans began stopping by the station, not just for gas, but to show their support. Many left business cards for Sarah and Mr. Parker, offering their phone numbers in case of future trouble. A retired Marine Sergeant Major who stopped for coffee shared his thoughts with Sarah. That ranger did us proud, he said, but more importantly, he showed these punks that picking on people isn't as safe as they thought it was. Detective Martinez returned to the station later that day, not for additional statements, but to share some news. We've linked these guys to similar incidents across 3 counties, she explained. Your soldier friend helped us crack a case we've been building for months. As the sun began to set on that second day, the media circus finally started to wind down. Sarah stood behind her counter, feeling different than she had just 24 hours ago. The fear that had been her constant companion during late shifts was gone, replaced by a new confidence. Mr. Parker closed up that night, making sure all the new security measures were in place. As he turned the keys in the lock, he noticed something that made him smile. A single motorcycle had pulled up to Pump 3, its rider wearing army fatigues. It wasn't Miller, but it represented something important. This small gas station on the outskirts of Phoenix had become a symbol of standing up against bullies, and the community was making sure it stayed that way. A week after the incident, Miller was sitting in his small apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix, drinking his morning coffee and reading the newspaper. He had successfully avoided the media attention, returning to his quiet life as a self-defense instructor at a local veterans center. However, the story had taken on a life of its own. The local newspaper's latest headline caught his eye. Biker gang members face multiple charges. More victims come forward. According to the article, Beast and his crew were now facing charges from 3 different counties. Their arrest at Parker's gas station had encouraged other victims to speak up, revealing a pattern of intimidation and violence across the state. Miller's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. Need to talk. Can you come down to the station? He hadn't planned on getting more involved, but something in the detective's tone suggested this was important. An hour later, Miller walked into the police station, his boots echoing in the busy hallway. Detective Martinez met him in the interview room, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was a man in his 60s, wearing a business suit and carrying himself with military bearing. Sergeant Miller, the man said, standing to shake his hand. I'm Colonel James Thompson, retired. I run a security consulting firm, and we've been watching your case with interest. Martinez smiled as she explained. The colonel here has been helping us track this gang's activities for months. What happened at the gas station gave us the break we needed. But there's more. Colonel Thompson laid out a folder on the table. These guys weren't just random troublemakers. They were part of a larger organization involved in drug trafficking. They used intimidation of local businesses as a cover for their real operations. Your actions didn't just save Sarah, you helped expose a major criminal network. Miller absorbed this information silently, thinking back to that night. His combat instincts had told him something wasn't right about those bikers, but he hadn't realized just how deep it went. We're building a case, Martinez continued, and we could use your help. Several other business owners are now willing to testify, but they're scared. They've seen how you handled yourself, and they trust you. Would you be willing to help provide security during the upcoming trial? Before Miller could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Mr. Parker. Got a situation at the station. Nothing urgent, but could use your advice when you have time." Miller looked up from his phone to see both Martinez and Thompson watching him expectantly. He realized that what had started as a simple act of standing up for someone had grown into something much larger. "I'll help," he said finally, "but on one condition: we need to set up a program to help other businesses protect themselves. Self-defense training, security consultations, a whole package." Colonel Thompson's face broke into a broad smile. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. My firm has been looking for someone to head up a community protection initiative. Someone with both the skills and the judgment to do it right." Meanwhile, across town at Parker's gas station, Sarah was training a new employee, her confidence evident in her voice and posture. The station had become something of a local symbol, a place where people stood up against intimidation. Mr. Parker had installed state-of-the-art security systems, but more importantly, the station had become a gathering point for local veterans who made sure no trouble started. They didn't make a show of it. Just regular customers who happened to keep a watchful eye on things. As Miller drove his motorcycle to the gas station later that day, he reflected on how life could change in unexpected ways. One decision, one moment of choosing to do the right thing, had created ripples that were still spreading through the community. Pulling into the station, he saw Mr. Parker waiting by the door, a grateful smile on his face. Several regular customers nodded in recognition. They all knew who he was, even though the media had never gotten his full story. Inside, Sarah was showing the new employee the emergency protocols, her voice steady and assured. The fear that had once filled this place was gone, replaced by something stronger, a sense of community and shared purpose. Miller parked his bike and walked toward the store, ready to help however he could. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest battles weren't won with fists or weapons, but with the courage to stand up and say enough when others looked away. 2 months after the incident, the courtroom was packed for the first day of the trial. Beast and his gang members sat in their orange jumpsuits, looking much less intimidating than they had that night at the gas station. Miller sat in the back row, watching as Sarah walked confidently to the witness stand. The prosecution had built a strong case. Along with the security footage from Parker's gas station, they had evidence linking the gang to dozens of similar incidents across the state. What had started as a simple gas station confrontation had unraveled an entire criminal operation. District Attorney Maria Rodriguez presented her opening statement with precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than just one night of violence. It's about a pattern of intimidation that has terrorized our community for years. Thanks to the courage of our witnesses and the actions of one brave soldier, we can finally bring these men to justice." Sarah's testimony was clear and unwavering. She described not just the night of the incident, but all the previous times the gang had harassed her and other employees. As she spoke, Miller noticed several business owners in the audience nodding in recognition. They had similar stories to tell. During a break in the proceedings, Detective Martinez pulled Miller aside in the courthouse hallway. "The FBI just connected these guys to 3 other criminal organizations in neighboring states," she whispered. "This is bigger than we thought." Miller's community protection program, now officially called Operation Guardians, had grown beyond his expectations. Working with Colonel Thompson's security firm, they had trained over 50 local business owners in basic security procedures and self-defense techniques. More importantly, they had created a network of support that made it harder for criminals to isolate and intimidate their targets. Back in the courtroom, Beast's lawyer attempted to paint the gang members as victims of circumstance. "My clients were simply misunderstood," he argued. "They had no intention of causing harm that night." The security footage told a different story. When the prosecution played the video showing Beast throwing the first punch with brass knuckles, several jurors visibly recoiled. The evidence of premeditated violence was undeniable. During lunch break, Mr. Parker sat with Miller in the courthouse cafeteria. "You know," the old station owner said, "business has actually improved since that night. People feel safe stopping at our station now, even late at night. We've become sort of a symbol." Miller nodded, thinking about how things had changed. The gas station now hosted weekly self-defense classes for local business owners and their employees. Sarah had become an instructor herself, teaching others the confidence she had found in standing up to intimidation. The afternoon session brought testimony from other victims. One by one, they told their stories. The small restaurant owner who had paid protection money, the convenience store clerk who had been beaten for calling the police, the mechanic whose shop had been vandalized. Each story added to the weight of evidence against the gang. As the day drew to a close, Miller received a text from Colonel Thompson. "Meet me outside. Got something to show you." In the parking lot, Thompson handed him a folder containing photos of similar gangs operating in other cities. "We're getting requests from all over the state," Thompson explained. "Other communities want to set up programs like Operation Guardians. They're tired of living in fear." Miller looked through the documents, remembering his own military training about how small tactical victories could lead to strategic changes. What had started as one confrontation at a gas station was evolving into a movement. Back inside the courthouse, the first day of testimony was ending. The gang members were being led back to their holding cells, their faces showing the first signs of real concern. They had expected their usual intimidation tactics to work. Witnesses backing out, evidence disappearing, charges being reduced. Instead, they faced a united community determined to see justice done. As Miller walked to his motorcycle, he passed Sarah talking to a group of young business owners who had come to observe the trial. She was explaining the importance of standing together, of not letting fear rule their lives. The sun was setting over Phoenix as Miller started his bike. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more evidence, more steps toward justice. But something fundamental had already changed in this community. People had discovered that when one person had the courage to stand up, others would stand with them. The night was cooling off, but the spirit of resistance that had been ignited at Parker's gas station was still burning strong, spreading hope to those who had lived too long in fear. 6 months after the night at Parker's gas station, the verdict was finally in. The jury took just 4 hours to find Beast and his gang members guilty on all counts. The judge, considering their long history of violence and intimidation, sentenced them to maximum terms, 15 years each in state prison. As the verdicts were read, Miller sat quietly in the back of the courtroom. Sarah, seated a few rows ahead, turned to give him a grateful smile. She had transformed from the frightened gas station attendant into a confident young woman who now helped run Operation Guardian's training programs. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to cover what had become one of the biggest criminal cases in the state's recent history. District Attorney Rodriguez addressed the cameras. "Today's verdict sends a clear message. Our community will no longer tolerate intimidation and violence. This case began with one soldier's courage to stand up for what's right, and it ended with an entire community finding its voice." Mr. Parker's gas station had become more than just a business. It was now a symbol of community resistance against criminal intimidation. The small convenience store had been renovated and expanded, with a new training room in the back where weekly self-defense classes were held. The security cameras that had captured the original incident were now part of a sophisticated security network that protected businesses throughout the area. Later that evening, a celebration was held at the Veterans Center where Miller taught self-defense. Local business owners, law enforcement officers, and community members gathered to mark not just the end of the trial, but the beginning of something new. Colonel Thompson stood up to make an announcement. Operation Guardians is expanding to 3 more states next month. What started here, with one soldier at one gas station, has become a model for communities across the country. Sometimes it just takes one person to show others what's possible. Detective Martinez shared updates on the broader investigation. The FBI had used evidence from the case to break up 2 major drug trafficking operations, and similar community protection programs were being established in other cities. Sarah took the podium next, her voice strong and clear. "6 months ago, I was afraid to work night shifts. Now I teach others how to protect themselves and their businesses." Sergeant Miller showed us that standing up to bullies isn't just about physical strength. It's about courage, community, and refusing to look the other way. Miller listened to the speeches with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't sought recognition or praise. He had simply done what he felt was right that night. But the ripple effects of his actions had created waves of positive change throughout the community. Mr. Parker approached Miller with tears in his eyes. "You know, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that night you didn't just save my station, you helped save our community's soul. People remember what it feels like to stand tall again." As the celebration continued, Miller stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear and cool, much like the evening when everything had changed. His phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Thompson. Just got word. 3 more gang leaders in Phoenix turned themselves in today. They've seen what happened to Beast's crew. The tide is turning. Back inside, the Veterans Center was filled with the sound of people sharing stories and making plans. Business owners who had once lived in fear now talked confidently about expanding their operations. Young employees who had worried about late-night shifts were signing up for self-defense classes. Sarah was showing a group of new business owners the security systems they had implemented at the gas station. The best defense, she explained, using Miller's words, is a community that stands together. As the evening wound down, Miller rode his motorcycle back to Parker's gas station, where it had all begun. The place looked different now, brighter, more welcoming, with cars filling the lot even at this late hour. A sign above the door read, "Community Safe Zone, Operation Guardian Site Number 1. He filled up his tank, nodding to the new night attendant who worked confidently behind the counter. The young man wasn't afraid. He was part of a community that had learned to protect its own. As Miller rode home under the stars, he reflected on how one moment of decision could change so many lives. The soldier in him knew that some battles were worth fighting, not for glory or recognition, but because they were right. And sometimes, those battles could inspire others to find their own courage, creating a legacy of strength that would endure long after the final verdict was read.